Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Young Professional African Edition with your host, Jonathan and
Shaneil Mudley, equipping you with all the right tools to jumpstart your career in an African context by sharing experiences
and spreading the gospel of information.
With original music brought to you by Africa's own Unil Badiachi.
Runyararo Cassidy Nyandoro is a young professional that was born and raised in the Zimbabwean capital, Harare. Runyararo is an alumni of the University of Cape Town, where he obtained a Bachelor in Commerce, and he currently works as the executive assistant to the managing director of Bank ABC in Zimbabwe, a regional Pan-African bank. He's passionate about finance and technology and how the two can be used to create a more inclusive society. He's the co-founder of Emerge Zim Trust, an organization with the aim of improving the quality of education for disadvantaged children, and he also chaired the UCT alumni chapter in Zimbabwe.
Cool, Rooney. So I think we can get straight into it now. The first thing is maybe just like introduce yourself. Where are you from and where did you grow up?
Okay, so I'm from a small country in Southern Africa. I know your program is broadcast to people across Africa, but I think we've become popular for many of the wrong reasons. So a lot of you, I think, will know Zimbabwe. That's where I'm from. That's where I grew up. I spent the first 18, 19 years of my life in Zimbabwe. So that's where I'm from, and I'm from the capital city, Harare.
Cool. And you said you spent your first 18, 19 years there. So where did you go study? What did you study?
I jumped across the border to South Africa, to the University of Cape Town, studied a BCom in management studies. I've always had a keen interest for business, so it was pretty much a no-brainer for me to go into commerce. And I think besides, that's where the money is, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that everyone in Africa has in common. You're always facing the money, eh? when you're coming. Once you completed your studies in SA, what was the plan for you? Were you trying to get a job in SA, or were you keen to go back home? Because obviously the economic environment back home, at least from the outside in, it seems that it's the unemployment rate is quite high and all of those sort of things. So what was the plan once you were done?
So my plan initially was to look for a job in SA. I think at the time the Home Affairs minister had changed. I think it had been a switchover from Malusi Gigaba to, and I can't recall who it was at the time, but the work permit requirements became more stringent, and so really there was no option but to come back to Zim. I think very fortunately, before I did come back, I did get an opportunity to intern at a wonderful institution in Zimbabwe. So I ended up looking forward to coming back, and I think no matter where you are, where you end up, whether you're on the Gold Coast in Ghana, or whether you're in North Africa or East Africa, there is opportunity. So yes, there is high unemployment in Zim, but I'm very encouraged by people who have a mindset that's open to opportunity. And so when I did come back, I said, as long as I'm back, I'll have to make the most of it.
100%. And I think that's a very important attitude to have. It shows a lot of resilience, which is much needed, I guess, on the continent. And in terms of this resilience, you've had quite a cool career in terms of for me, it's at least, it seemed quite exponential, your leaps from job to job. So maybe just give us some background on that. So you said you started off at a research institute, and then where are you now? So let's just speak through that journey.
Okay, so yes, I started off my internship at a Pan-African organization called MEFMI. That stands for the Macroeconomic and Financial Management Institute of Eastern and Southern Africa. And I was an intern there for about 6 months, doing everything interns do. So carrying tables, moving furniture. If anyone asks you to get their lunch, you get it. But it was a wonderful multicultural environment. I worked with people from Tanzania, Botswana, Kenya, Uganda, and so I loved that experience. At the end of that internship period, it just happened to coincide with the departure of one of their senior managers who went to the African Development Bank, and I was very fortunate that they called me back to fill into his position. So at a very young age, that was a taste of what management could be like, or the responsibilities that lie therein. And I think it really helped me build confidence at the time, because fresh out of university, you're in a management role with those responsibilities. Obviously not the full scale responsibilities that he had, but I pioneered one of their programs on e-learning across Africa, and we rolled it out to about 14 African countries with over 100 participants, and that was my responsibility. And I think to deliver that program, I was supported by someone who's become a lifelong mentor to me, who was one of the other program managers, and he sort of held my hand through the process as we rolled out this e-learning course on public expenditure and financial management. And it was a really good experience for me. Good because of the responsibility I've spoken about, but also because the course itself gave me a lot of knowledge about how public finances are managed in Africa, or the correct way to manage public finances. And that was the first time in my career that I've actually come across, or had come across, issues to do with public audit and public accounting. And I looked around, those issues were very prominent in newspapers. And then you sort of realize that, actually Africa is building capacity within its people to manage public finances, because that was the role the institution I was in played. However, we are not adopting best practices when it comes to managing public finances. And you look at South Africa, I mean, the legacy issues in SA, as well as the issues in Zim, and you really see that there's a lot that still needs to be done. And so that was the early stage of my career. I then went through a brief period of unemployment after that contract ended. And I think as African youth, that's something we all experience. The question becomes, what do you do with yourself during that period? And I said to myself, I need to build my own capacity and my own capabilities. And so I signed up for the CFA. I think you're very aware how demanding a program it is. But I signed up for CFA, and the idea being that I would make the best of the period of unemployment to develop myself. I was then very fortunate to find an opportunity at a little known bank at the time, or a bank that was growing at the time, Stewart Bank, Zimbabwe, that eventually became one of the biggest banks in a 5-year period, which was an incredible turnaround by the leadership at the time. But I joined Stewart Bank in the strategy and innovation department. And I like to say this now, I think there's actually a book written about it. I consider myself an accidental banker, because I came across that opportunity, and I think I made the best of it. I really enjoyed working in strategy and innovation, the challenge of trying to deliver innovations that deliver impact to countries and communities. So I think that was very much the thrust of the founder of Stewart Bank, or the founder of Econet, to financially include people. And so I found it to be a role with a purpose, and I made the best of my time there. And I went through the graduate trainee program at Stewart Bank with a real intention, again, to build my capabilities and my understanding of the environment I was in. One of the leaders there, who's now Chief Operating Officer of SAISAI, an up-and-coming WeChat of Africa, if you will, he always said to me, you need to work to understand your area and then work to dominate it. So that's exactly what I did, and I think that was a good, what can I call it, a good foundation for my career. And after that, I've moved on to Bank ABC. I found myself in another Pan-African institution, which I'm very happy about. And in this role, I'm now executive assistant to the CEO. Again, a stroke of, I think, good fortune to work with a CEO of a rising bank and one of the most talented people I know.
That's quite an interesting story, and I think there was a lot of stuff there to unpack. So I think before we go into your actual day to day, maybe just it's something that you briefed over, but I think it's super important to maybe discuss as somebody who's moved now from university. When you were given this opportunity at a managerial level, do you think that when an opportunity like that presents itself, it's important to always take it and then figure out how to do it, or do you think it might have been better that you first built yourself up and then got into that position? So how did you, as a young person being given this opportunity, like, how did you view it?
I think first and foremost, like I said, I was very fortunate to be given the role. But I think also you need to be honest with yourself. You need to be able to assess yourself and the level at which you're operating. One of the greatest skills or qualities of leaders, I read a lot of literature on the subject, seems to be self-awareness. And so I always look at myself and say, am I ready to take this role or to step into it? And if that answer is yes, then whether or not you're technically ready or you think you can handle the workload, go ahead and run with it. But you also need to be honest enough with yourself to say, I still have a lot of learning to do before I accept such a role. So in that role, specifically at the time, I knew the requirements, and although I wasn't completely knowledgeable of how to handle the day-to-day responsibilities, it was something I was more than comfortable taking.
So I think at a high level, maybe just extracting some insight there, it's if I was applying a framework to analyzing the situation, it would be to step away, identify your own skill sets or your own capabilities more so than your skill sets, understanding the role and the requirements, and then making an informed decision based on, I guess, your work ethic, your ability or your willingness to learn more, and your ability and willingness to adapt to a changing environment. I think that those are like sort of the key things that you've outlined to sort of tackle something like that.
That's exactly it. And I think to add to that, you look at the team around you. I was very fortunate to have a supportive team. Again, like I said, someone who held my hand through the process, and that made my life a lot easier.
So, and I think that touches on something that we've been speaking about, which has been a common theme for us, I guess, through all of our interviews, the theme of mentorship and how important it is. So just on your journey, maybe just going into a bit on that mentorship, you did say you had this guy as a mentor. Did he end up being an intentional mentor? Did you approach him and ask him for this? Or was it an informal mentorship that turned into something else? And have you had any other professional mentors along the way?
So yes, definitely. I think mentorship is essential for any up and coming professional. No matter where in the world you are, you need to learn from the best. That relationship was informal. We just got along naturally, and of course, you need to identify a mentor who you think can grow and develop you. I admired a lot of qualities that he had. A very smart individual. He's actually recently just got his PhD, so I'm very proud of him for doing that. But yes, it's important to identify someone who has qualities you'd like to possess, not necessarily someone you'd want to be like, because you need to be your own person. I think since then I have had, and I do have, a couple of mentors. Again, it's people who I think I can learn from. The most obvious one being my my current boss and the person I report to, but I do have a number of mentors who I seek advice from time to time, based on their experience and their outlook on life.
Really interesting there. A lot of really insightful points that you've given there, Rini. And I think, maybe now fast forwarding to your position as an executive analyst, I think that's a really impressive leap to make in such a short period of time, that you're working directly with the CEO. So what does this actually entail for anybody who's out there looking to do a similar transition? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? What are some of the good parts of your job and some of the bad parts of your job?
I think as an executive assistant, my job has been to run as fast as the CEO. So I work in a really fast-paced environment, and I think keeping up with him is the challenge on a day-to-day basis. I think an executive analyst is someone who provides support to the CEO. I'm saying analyst now. Executive assistant is someone who provides support to the CEO. So I find the CEO on a daily basis in any organization has to have an aerial view of what's going on in an organization. It's in its entirety, and occasionally he requires implementation of a few initiatives or tracking of projects, and he can't always be doing that. So I provide that support on a day-to-day basis. That's pretty much my job. Um, Arrangement of meetings and reporting. So I think it's very good in that I get to get that overview business of banking. It's another type of education. It's not necessarily formal education, but it's allowed me to learn a lot about banking in a very short space of time.
That's really amazing. I can imagine the sort of experiences that you're having of having this overview of the banking sector. And I think you mentioned that it's quite a high-paced environment. Maybe just explaining to everyone who's not from Zimbabwe, what is it like to be operating at a big bank in an environment with a high unemployment rate? So are there like a lot of are there things in the environment that forces you to be fast-paced? Is there high turnover rates in your company? Just maybe give us a context, like contextualize it for us so we can imagine the scenario.
Okay, I think um, a good example of this would be the coronavirus that's recently affected us all. And looking at it in a Zimbabwean context, one thing you'll see, or one thing you'll find, is that this economy is heavily dependent on remittances. And so you find that as a bank, we had to move really quickly to ensure that our remittance services were available even on weekends. So typically Zimbabwean banks operate from Monday until Saturday midday, but we extended those services to from Monday to Sunday. And I mean it's an example of how a global event has shaped banking in Zimbabwe. To provide another example is the policy change. I think perhaps that's the most challenging factor, or one of the most challenging factors we face in this environment, because at times you never know what environment you wake up in on the next day. So you always have to be prepared. Of course, those policy changes are made to counter and enhance the operating environment, but a bit of stability, I think, would be desirable so that we can move forward.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So I can imagine it's quite an environment that changes quite often. In terms of the businesses and the services, you said that remittance is a big aspect of the Zimbabwean business. Maybe just for people out there who aren't familiar, I guess, with the finance lingo, what exactly do you mean by that in simple terms?
Okay, I think simply, so Zimbabwe, I think in 2008 went through record hyperinflation. For that reason, a lot of young professionals my age left Zimbabwe to go and seek opportunities elsewhere, but they obviously left behind children or parents, and those children and parents are dependent on money that comes from countries outside of Zimbabwe. So a lot of that money supports the economy in Zimbabwe. I know I've seen figures estimating remittances into Zimbabwe of about 1.7 billion annually. By some estimates, other estimates will put it at about $1 billion a year. For an economy that generates, or the size of the economy that was about 15 billion a couple of years ago, I think that gives you perspective as to how valuable remittances are to the economy.
Wow, that is really, really a big part of your economy there. And I think another thing I'd like to find out then is the fact that you're now operating Monday to Sunday. How has that affected your working hours? If you can give us an indication of like, what are your working hours like now, given that you're an executive assistant in a big bank that's operating Monday to Sunday?
It means you can never switch off. I think I have it easier than our team in the branches, because I know they're hard at work on Sunday and they're in the branch. That is an initiative that's seized, because we are sort of back to normal operating hours now, after movement restrictions were relaxed. But on a personal basis, I work pretty much all the time. I mean, I talk to a lot of my colleagues or friends from UCT. I know you guys go through the same thing I've been going through. I think we actually never switch off, right?
Yeah, it's not always a good thing. Okay, no, so that must be quite a tough situation as well, I guess, with the working hours and the fact that the bank is, you have to always be operating at your best. And do you think that you're able to do this long term? So what is your, let's maybe discuss your long term plays there. What is the long term goal? Is this you paying your dues, or do you see yourself operating this environment in 5 to 10 years from now?
I think you always have to pay your dues. As for the long-term plan, I think I'm inspired, or have been inspired, by a documentary I've been watching recently on Michael Jordan, The Last Dance. And you think you push yourself hard, and then you see professionals who've operated at that level for so long. I think Michael Jordan's career lasted 15 years or so of operating at a level at which he was the world's best. When you watch the documentary, you listen to his teammates say how motivated he was every single day. And I think that challenges me to say, why can't I bring my best to the table for 10 to 15 years? My long-term plan, what is it? A good chess player never, what is it? Good chess or good blackjack player never reveals his hand, right?
Okay, no, that's fair enough if you don't wanna. But can you at least give a teaser if it's business, if it's corporate, what environment do you want to be operating in?
I think I have a desire to rise in corporate, because I think I have a lot to bring to the table. But at the same time, I think we have a responsibility to build Africa's next generation of companies. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I draw inspiration from Elon Musk. I think this weekend, the SpaceX was launched to the International Space Station. And I look at Musk and see he's running SpaceX and he's running Tesla. Of course, all of us can't be that superhuman. If he can run 2 or 3 multi-billion-dollar companies, then surely I can run 2 or 3 multi-million-dollar companies.
That's a very good point. And then I think finally my last question is, what are you passionate about? So I think even when you bring up people like Musk and Michael Jordan, both of them, what they have in common is that they've got a very powerful why behind them. On both occasions, they really, whatever it is, if the why is to be the best in basketball, or the why is to solve a problem and put people in space, and whatever it is, but there's always a strong why behind what we do. What are you passionate about?
So I think that's an interesting observation, and perhaps I'll bring my own perspective here. I think when I look at Musk or Jordan or any of the leaders I admire, I think their why is people. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when I watch MJ speak, he talks about restoring a pride to the people of the city of Chicago. And when I listen to Musk, he talks about new frontiers for human beings, you know, our ability to be able to exist on Mars, should Earth be no longer be a viable, sustainable option. And my why is people too. So I think I love nothing more than to see people empowered, to see people given opportunity. I think we know from our studies that one of the greatest problems we face in Africa is the fact that people are not fully employed. They're unemployed, they're completely unemployed, or they're partially unemployed. And by that, I mean you find graduates who are working in positions where they're not able to fully utilize their skills and knowledge. And I think that's one of the greatest tragedies for certainly for my generation, because we had a massive human capital investment into educating people, but none of those returns have been realized. So my why and what drives me is to eventually provide platforms or businesses that are able to empower people to reach their maximum potential. And I think once you do that, you enable an economy or whatever else it is to reach its potential.
Okay, so a very interesting interview there, Shaneil. A few points from me that I resonated with. Firstly, I completely resonated with the point of a foreign student studying in a foreign country and struggling to get work authorization. I think there's a bit to talk about there, considering that I'm a strong proponent of leaving your home country and studying elsewhere. And secondly, around the positive mindset, I think Shaneil, you're the one who always speaks a lot about this, and where we talk about context and making the most of it, making the most out of it, and lastly, stepping into big roles, even though you feel like you don't have sufficient experience or the required technical know-how, just having that belief in your own ability, believing that you can learn on the job at the very least. Anyway, Shaneil, what did you get from this interview?
Yeah, so definitely I think the barriers around the movement of human capital on the continent is something that is quite upsetting, given that we've got so many qualified individuals on the continent, and the past interviewees are testament to that. So I think that for me is a big thing. Another solid thing for me is Rooney's attitude and the resiliency associated with Rooney. And I think I've seen that with quite a few other of my Zimbabwean friends. You know, when you coming from those quite a hectic working environment, and I asked them about the state of affairs there. It's always like, yes, things are hectic, but I'm willing to grind, or I am going to grind, and there's no two ways about it. And I think another thing is that another big point for me is when he made those comparisons to Michael Jordan and to Elon Musk, those sort of things, and he really humanized these icons. He says, these are great people that we look up to, and if they can do this much with this much of their time, surely I can do half or even a quarter and still be okay. So I think not putting, I guess, not putting the people you look up to on pedestals, and understanding that you're capable of doing the same thing if you're willing to put in the work. Because honestly, it all boils down, at least in my eyes, it boils down to your attitude and your work ethic. And that's something that came really strong for me from Rooney, and that's why he's able to move into these different roles as quickly as he did.
Yeah, I really resonated with that power of a positive mindset. I think given the context, right, the African context, things are far from perfect on the African continent. Whether you're trying to just start a business or whether you're looking for jobs, the African climate for business. I'm an African optimist, but there are impediments to to certain things that you wouldn't normally find in like a first world country. So like I think that positive mindset for me, that frame of mind, that even though you're in a economy that might be struggling, you can still persevere and be amazing. And one example of a person that he even mentions in that interview, I don't know if you noticed, he talks about Strive Masiwa. I don't know if you know, he's a Zimbabwean billionaire who started Econet Wireless. You know, if you look at Econet Wireless now, you know, the amount of companies it owns across the African continent, like in Australia, in Europe, you would not think that company was started in Zimbabwe, you know. And I think that's the type of mindset that you, it's not easy, but that's the frame of mind you need to have, especially in those contexts where things can be depressing, things look like they're not happening, things look stagnant. I'm a firm believer in where the most problems are, that's where lies the biggest opportunity. And I think it's that mindset that will make a difference in those contexts.
Totally agree with that. And I think, you know, looking at it from an African context, the best that the continent can do, or at least I don't know if it's governments or who should be accountable for it, is just creating the space for these opportunities to thrive. So we do have things like the Africa Free Trade Agreement coming into place and stuff like that. But how do we then also move our human capital across borders more easily? And yeah, so you know, the trade agreement is for your goods and services, but what about the people?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I love that you brought up the African Free Trade Agreement. That's something I'm actually excited about. I think the power that will come from the African continent will come from us operating as one. If we create one big trade area, I think we gain more power when negotiating with these stronger economic forces that you'll never get when negotiating one on one. Like, you know, a Zambia negotiating with the US. You know, it's the tables are so skewed in the US's favor. But when you're negotiating with one African market, I think that there could be significant opportunities for the African continent there. But anyway, I think we should have a separate podcast for the African Free Trade Agreement. I really love that one. But back to your point on movement of human labor. So I was also a foreign student who was studying in South Africa at the time, and I really struggled to get work authorization to work in South Africa. So I really resonated with what he was talking about, because it was, you know, you have a certain skill set in which you want to hone, and normally you would want to hone it in a better economy. You know, I have friends that have studied in the UK, the US, you know, and they have also faced similar problems. And also, like, having more Africans that understand the African continent better only comes from Africans moving across the African continent, you know. Like, how the only reason why I feel like I understand sub-Saharan African better than someone who has been in one country in sub-Saharan Africa is because I was born in Zimbabwe. I grew up in Zimbabwe. I've worked in South Africa. You know, I've had opportunity to work with companies in Namibia. You know, it gives me that holistic view that I think is important. You know.
Yeah, definitely. I think another thing to point out with the interview with Rooney is the current operating environment of Zimbabwe. And in my head, I was actually drawing a comparison to the US. So even though the US is fairly developed as a market, their current policies or labor laws create a high turnover employee environment. So everyone needs to be working at their best, right? And if you look at the Zimbabwe operating environment, it seemed quite similar. Rooney said his job is to keep up with the CEO. So he's definitely working in a very high performing environment where a lot of hours are required from him. But the biggest difference between the two spaces is the one has a lot more funding than the other. So you're earning a lot more in the US than you are in Zimbabwe. And I don't know the answer, but that begs the question for me: if we're able to deliver the same input, if we're able as Africans to work the same hours and deliver on similar products, because banking products across the world, at least the vanilla ones, are quite similar. So if we're able to execute on the product, execute on the inputs in terms of our work hours, how do we then start seeing the same outputs so that we're able to pay our staff in the same way that the US is earning? To sort of accommodate, or it needs to be worth your while putting in all of these hours, which you do see in the US. If you work a 16-hour day at Goldman Sachs, you're going to be paid a lot of money, but I don't think we see the fruits of our labor as much in Africa.
Yeah, I also like that he worked for a Pan-African bank. Bank ABC is pretty big. It has branches across the sub-Saharan African region. I actually, when I was hearing the interview, I was like, I really envied that, that because he probably needs to understand different contexts, different countries across the African continent to help the CEO execute. And I think that bodes in nicely to another point that I learned that I really liked from this interview, which was stepping into those big shoes. Even though, an executive assistant to the CEO is a really, especially for a young person, is a massive position. I think in our organization we call them chief of staffs.
Chief of staff.
Yes, I think they are springboards of the future leaders of that organization. Those are the people that get those jobs. So for him to get that at his age and level of experience is amazing. And then he speaks to even though you might not have the technical ability or the years of experience, that belief that you'll be able to fill the shoes for him was important. And I really liked that, because often as millennials, and I've seen that in my own experience in corporate, because you come from university, right? And you're just this first year in corporate, you feel like a kid. Second year, you don't make that switch. It's difficult to make that switch from being the baby in the corporate world to being someone who makes big decisions and who holds his own in important conversations. And I liked that he zoned in on mindset, and I think that's an important thing to look at.
Yeah, and I think just on that point, something that came to mind for me, which I've had this discussion, I think, with some of the more senior staff, I guess, at my firm as well. Once, and this, I don't know if this is a good or bad part about it, is once you're in that position at an early stage. So like, let's say me or you got the chief of staff opportunity. Usually those roles last for 1 to 2 years, where you are the chief of staff, typically. How do you then, or what is the next step after that? Do you end up in a higher position in the same sort of division that you were in before, or how do you? And I think this would be a great question for any of our listeners, if you guys have an answer, if you've done something that way. But how do you springboard yourself from chief of staff to the next thing as a young person in an organization? Because what's after that? How do you utilize that? So I think for me that was quite a scary thought that I had in my head. It's like, can I go more up, or am I only going to experience a sort of a lateral move now?
I think just hearing you speak right now, for me, it strengthens my thoughts around creating a vision for yourself. Because I think if you have a strong long-term vision and you're in that chief of staff role, I think you're already looking at what that next move will look like while in that chief of staff role, and you already start building. Because chief of staff is a very generalist position, right? You're supporting the leading guy in that division or company, and these guys look on a strategic level on the entire organization. So while you learn that holistic view, you also start creating those building blocks on what would you like to maybe focus on after that, this particular job, and take those insights on a holistic view into that new position.
Yeah, I quite like that. And I think Rooney also illustrated that in terms of his thinking around his longer term plans and stuff. So he understands quite well where he wants to be, and he's utilizing the space that he's in and taking the opportunities that have come his way to sort of upskill himself and get himself ready, which is quite admirable. I think that's something that, as an insight, that we should take away from that.
Oh yes. So another thing, I also really liked when he started talking about mentorship, and he was like, "You shouldn't try to be your mentor because you're a completely different person." He's like, "You should have mentors that you obviously admire and you can learn from, but you should still, be yourself." And I really liked that, because often I've seen it even with myself when I'm trying to create a vision for myself. I have this thing where I have these people that I admire. Then I check like, what do they study? Where did they go to study? What companies do they work for? It's almost as if I subconsciously think that could potentially be my path. Like it's almost like I'm subconsciously thinking I can just mirror that. I love this guy. I love his work. I can just mirror his. But we're all completely different, like different characters, different people. So I think we always need to be open to that notion of you are different, your path will be different, and you should be okay with that.
Yeah, and there's not only one path to success, because I'm guilty of that as well, and I do that sometimes on LinkedIn. I go and I just stalk somebody that I deem successful in my eyes, and I start to see, where did they study, what did they do? Okay, flip, so now I need to go study at this university, or I need to get this role at this particular place. And I think like that's a very important thing that Rooney said there, is just your role is different. So everyone's on a different journey. It doesn't mean that it's going to be less successful. It just means that you're carving your own way. So for me, an important takeaway from that discussion is just understand be deliberate about what you're trying to take away from your mentor. So, if it's his ability to network, if it's some sort of hard skill set that he has, or whatever it is, his ability to bring in business development and talent in the organization, who knows? But be deliberate and understand why you find your mentor interesting, and, keep asking why. So, I really like this guy. Why? Because he's really good at financial modeling. Why? Because he studied this. Why? And you start drilling down and really understanding what aspect you're trying to build or take away from that person.
And I think it also helps to have conversations with these people. I think that's why maybe creating the mentorship relationship is important. Because I remember I was speaking to one of my seniors in high school. He's doing his MBA at a top university called INSEAD now, and we're just having a conversation. And like in my mind, I was like, "Oh my God, you've gotten the best into one of the best programs. This is amazing." But he had this benefit of hindsight, right? So when he was telling me about what I should consider when doing my MBA, it's like, you know what, Jonathan, you need to already start creating the path of what you want to do after your MBA before you even choose the MBA. Like it's not the institution that's gonna create something for you. It's still you. Who's responsible for creating.
Sure, Jonathan, is this the same friend who planned for a child?
No, that's a different one. That's yeah, man. I do have. I don't know. Like I do attract very responsible individuals in myself. But yeah, no, I just love that, right? Like the person you're admiring will probably tell you, "Nah, that's the longest route, Shaneil. Actually, you could maybe not do that MBA. Start a business or something, like, maybe get that hindsight from that mentor rather than just mirroring their journey."
Yeah, that's so true. And I think just the last one on that is, last point on that is, I spoke to some potential graduates, so they just finished the university after one of our other podcasts, the one with the IFC, with Kale from the IFC. And the thing was like, she did so many masters. How am I going to stand a chance in going into the working world? And I think the point that came out from Rooney's conversation answers that, is that there's many ways to success. There's many roads to success. You don't need to necessarily have that many masters in order to succeed in a profession that you deem enjoyable or that you
Well, and also just to maybe just to segue, it's unrelated to this interview, but Kale also added something after that interview, which could be helpful for that listener. She was like, "It's getting into the World Bank. You can get in as a professional, like she did, like at that high level with experience, with like a lot of master's degrees. But you could also apply for the young professional program." Which she considers more for young people, 2-year rotation program, and then you're in the World Bank. I think the requirements are a lot more reasonable there. So Kale's position obviously is for those experienced, but there is a way to enter the World Bank or the IFC using those young professional programs. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Young Professional African Edition. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the show on Apple Music, Spotify, or whatever platform that you use to listen to podcasts.
And if you enjoyed the show, give us a like and a follow. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at YP_Africa. That's YP_Africa. And if you've missed an episode, don't stress. You can catch up on our YouTube channel, YP_Africa. Like and subscribe, guys. Like and subscribe.
That's it from us, guys. See you next week.